So the principal focus of this video is in a discussion of ludonarrative synergy in The Last of Us 2. So the script and video started there, but discussion of ludonarrative demands a really good discussion of Clint Hawking's creation and use of the term in his essay on BioShock, titled The Problem of What the Game is About. From there, it's really necessary to understand its popularity, its use, and its misuse, most notably in Uncharted. And really, The Last of Us and Uncharted are already bound in their publishers, so let's try it. This game, The Last of Us 2, changed the way I think about games. Clint Hawking rips a lot of the way BioShock feels to play as a game, and he says that the medium is very young. One day we'll have a Citizen Kane of games, but not quite. The Last of Us 2 isn't that either, but it is a technical masterpiece in storytelling, so again, let's do this. Happy holidays, even though this will most certainly come out well into the new year. This is ludonarrative synergy in The Last of Us 2. So we have to start, of course, with Clint Hawking's original essay. If you care about games in any capacity or are interested in reading a very well-formulated argument, it's essential. It's linked below in the description, but I'll summarize. BioShock spends a lot of time telling you narratively what it's about. I'm not talking about anything specifically associated with its identity as a game, but in the voice recordings you pick up, in the setting, the premises, and characters. It has a very clear set of ideas it wants to discuss. The game is about Randian objectivism. The world of the game is populated with characters and a setting who has been destroyed by this idea that to create and produce with no regard for anything or anyone else is the most notable height to which man can aspire. That's well and good. It's nice to consume media that's about something. The tremendous advantage games have is that you, the player, are allowed to participate in these ideas, in this dialogue, in a safe and controlled way. So, BioShock offers a contract. There are these mutated children called little sisters who wander around and possess quite a lot of power, which would make your character stronger, so you can save them and return them to a place where they might not be safe for no personal benefit, or kill them and take their power. This is the central premise which is yours to engage with. This is objectivism in microcosm. Who benefits if you are allowed to grow and become free and powerful with explicit disregard for those around you? This is the ludic contract. Harvest little sisters, grow more powerful, and you'll progress. The narrative, though, or not just the set dressing and backdrop, but the actual way the story moves, proposes a much worse contract. To move the story along, you have to help somebody named Atlas. It isn't in line with the core idea proposed in the mechanics. You aren't given a choice. This is how you move the plot along, and to help somebody because it's the right thing to do is actually fully in diametric opposition to the idea of objectivism, of rational self-interest. Quote from Clint Hawking, "Yet, in the game's fiction, on the other hand, I do not have the freedom to choose between helping Atlas or not. Under the ludic contract," and by ludic he means the elements of a game, ludic means play. "If I accept to adopt an objectivist approach, I can harvest little sisters. If I reject that approach, I can rescue them. Under the story, if I reject an objectivist approach, I can help Atlas and oppose Ryan. And if I choose to adopt an objectivist approach, well, too bad. I can stop playing the game, but that's about it." End quote. So there it is. That's the ludonarrative dissonance. The really insulting thing BioShock does, however, is in its conclusion, taunting you and revealing in a twist that your character wasn't helping Atlas by their free will, but they were controlled and programmed to. You're laughed at for buying into ideas which already undermine the ludic contract proposed. This essay is crucial because it frames our and really all understandings and arguments about ludonarrative dissonance. It's a really brilliant idea. It spoke to something that was on our cultural collective tongue, and as a new word to describe games and criticize them, it gained a lot of traction. If game design was in its infancy at this point, game criticism seems to still have been yet unborn. And of course, when it was born, its first spoken words were ludonarrative dissonance. So the first big question is, why Uncharted in particular? It really is the most popular target of this argument, and it's made by the same publishers as The Last of Us, and the developers acknowledge the criticism in the game. So the argument goes like this. Ludonarrative dissonance is disagreement in the story told by a game's mechanics and narrative. Uncharted is a game about Nathan Drake. It's Indiana Jones. You fight bad guys as a really, really likable treasure hunter trying to get a lost city or a treasure or something. But As I'll try to make an underlying thread in the video, the game revolves mechanically around puzzle solving or shooting segments, and you kill a lot of bad guys, maybe thousands or tens of thousands over the 4 games. There's the dissonance. Nathan Drake never flinches or thinks outwardly about killing so many people, despite that being the story the mechanics tell. In Uncharted 4, if you kill 1,000 people, you get a trophy called Ludonarrative Dissonance. So here's why the criticism is probably not appropriate. Uncharted isn't a game about killing people. It's not a game about treasure hunting either. It's not really much about anything. They're really great games and immensely fun. I've platinumed all of them, but there isn't a message proposed by the mechanics. The way the puzzle segments and shooting segments play individually and interact with each other doesn't tell a story. It's hard to say definitively. It's really up to argument and discussion, but it's possible for Ludus in Uncharted and in general to be unmotivated. Dan Olsen of Folding Ideas has a really excellent video about ludonarrative dissonance where he responds to a criticism that the same comparison doesn't make sense for a movie to be described as cinema-narratively dissonant. And he goes on to argue that that's actually a great word to describe some movies. Megan Fox in Transformers is treated by the narrative to be capable, strong, savvy, and independent, but is treated by the camera like something to be oogled and gawked at. They disagree about how the audience is supposed to see her. So too then can a shot or motion of the camera be completely unmotivated. It's inappropriate to use the word cinema narrative dissonance in The Room, for example, because, well, what's cinema? It's a really fun movie, but the way the camera frames Johnny doesn't have a story to tell. There isn't really dissonance because there aren't two opinions that disagree, like there seem to be in BioShock. There's very clearly intent to involve the player in a discussion about objectivism. This is basically why I get the impression that ludonarrative dissonance is an inappropriate word to describe Uncharted. Just because you're playing a game doesn't mean that the mechanics are specifically and precisely aimed at telling a story. Sometimes it's just fun to eat dots as Pac-Man. So here's the rub. Games as a product are most fun when you're killing bad guys. So often the game is split into killing people and pausing to listen to why you're trying to find the lost city of gold or whatever. You can pick up some collectibles, perhaps maybe a character you like dies, but these two different ideas, ludus and narrative, don't interact well unless they're designed to. So how do you make a game about killing people? Remember, because this is a product which will be engaged with for 40 hours or so it has to be fun to play the whole time. It's not enough to make something experimental, it has to sell. How do you make that synergize well with the story you're trying to sell? Well, make a game about war. The Last of Us 2 answers the question of what would happen if Drake were a character written to feel hurt for the people he's killed. What if some of Drake's loved ones were killed? What you get out of that, from a team which understands design so well, is a technical masterpiece. It demands attention and thought and rewrites what games are allowed to be and do. Okay, so finally, I'm so excited to talk about this. The groundwork is laid, and the last thing I need to make super clear is that I'm going to spoil the fuck out of The Last of Us 1 and 2. Okay, ready? Here we go. The Last of Us 1 is a masterpiece in its own right. It introduces Joel and Ellie, and the game revolves around their bond and father-daughter dynamic in the zombie apocalypse. It's beautiful, and it's so well told. The two of them are really brilliantly characterized individually and as a unit. Joel is resistant because he lost his own biological daughter Sarah in the beginning of the game. Their growth towards and around one another is absolutely wonderful. Ellie is immune to the spores which turn the dead into zombies, which means she's capable in theory of developing a cure for the plague and saving humanity. The game ends with Joel dropping her off with a resistance group dedicated to the salvation and betterment of humanity, the Fireflies. He realizes almost too late that to create a useful cure, they need to perform surgery on her skull, which will kill her. We've come to know Joel. He's murdered his way across the country on her behalf, but he's been killing zombies and clearly bad guys. Ellie is humanity's only hope as things stand, and yet, we know that Joel is unable to lose her like he lost Sarah. He points his gun at the surgeons who operate on her, and understandably, they point their scalpels back at him. They're trying to save the world. Joel kills all of them and all of the Resistance members in cold blood and flees with an unconscious Ellie as the game ends. This ending is absolutely gut-wrenching. We aren't given the option to let her die because this isn't a discussion like one we're involved in BioShock. It's a character study where we have to pull the trigger. Joel is so clearly the villain in this story, which isn't a flaw of The Last of Us 1, but it is a mandatory discussion The Last of Us 2 has to have. My expectations were low for The Last of Us 2. You play as Ellie in this one. In the trailer, she kisses a girl. Hey, that's nice. You kill some dogs in the trailer too. The bad guys have names in this one, like if you kill somebody, their friend will yell out, "No, Sharon!" Maybe the plot of this one is that you have to go save Joel or something from the bad guys. And then, many months later, I started playing. In the opening act, you play as a new girl. She's buff. So cool. What's going on? This girl, Abby, meets Joel, and they escape infected together. Not long after, she and Joel's brother Tommy regroup with Abby's larger group, where Abby shoots Joel in the leg and starts to torture him. They tricked you. You're not playing as one of the main characters. You just controlled the villain briefly, and Abby is the villain. Ellie comes to rescue him, and Abby really brutally kills him before letting Ellie go. This is the plot of the game. Go get revenge on Abby for killing Joel. It's a really surprising first act. It's meant to shock you. It's really disorienting having played Abby. The seeming peace Joel has in his new society, having aged a bit, is shattered, and your favorite character from the last two games is dead before the game starts in proper. And here is a great place to mention The Last of Us 2's critical and commercial reception. This game is a masterpiece, and it's one of the best games I've ever played, and it was really disliked by a lot of its audience. Why? It has a 93 from critics and a 5.7 from fans. There are 3 reasons I can think of, 2 of which are really simple, the third is difficult, and I will spend the rest of the video talking about. Firstly, a lot of gamers are homophobic. There's a very clear backlash to the trailer of Ellie kissing a girl, and surprise, misogyny and homophobia are super rampant in communities of people who play video games. Oops. The second reason is Joel dies immediately in a way that's supposed to knock the wind out of you. It's inflammatory and really fucks with you having to play Abby not knowing her intent and then watching her kill Joel brutally. There's a super crucial distinction to be made here, and the absolute strength of The Last of Us 2 shines through immediately before any real gameplay. This isn't a beloved character. This is your character. The avatar you occupied for some 20 hours is dead. The distinction between a character you like and a character you controlled dying is really the centric ludic message of The Last of Us 2. It's so important to understand why Joel dying at the beginning of The Last of Us 2 hurts so badly. As we discussed, he's really deeply evil and has killed enough innocent people to justify his treatment. He took away humanity's best chance at survival by killing not just soldiers, but talented surgeons and doctors. So why does it feel like such a punch in the gut to see him killed like he is? That's not a question I'm posing, but one that was posed to me and to anyone playing the game. But one easy answer is that they shouldn't have. Can you understand hating this game because it killed your character? It's wrong and it's a bad way to read fiction, but it isn't confusing. So the game starts. I'm going to run through details which are important. I'm going to try not to include any fluff, but I promise that every important plot point matters more than once, and all of these are relevant repeatedly. You control Ellie, who is traveling to Seattle to find and kill Abby, who, recall, is the clear villain. You have a few other faces, but Abby is the target. You travel with Dina, Ellie's romantic acquaintance, and along the way you meet up with Jesse, who is the father of Dina's unborn child, and Tommy, Joel's brother. Most of the time you're with one of these 4, but the dynamics are really well formed. Tommy is a mentor to Ellie. He taught her how to use weapons. He cares about her and would give his life for hers in a moment. Dina is in love with Ellie and comes with her because she cares about her and doesn't want anything to happen to her. She's incredibly strong and quite funny and takes care of Ellie in a way that's tender and touching. Jesse is similarly devoted to Ellie, but because he's kind and loyal, he's a good friend. Ellie is clearly sort of quietly jealous about his and Dina's past relationship, and Jesse asks Ellie first if Dina's pregnant. You arrive in Seattle in the middle of two groups fighting for the city. The Washington Liberation Front, or WLF, Wolves, are a militant and tightly organized group. They have a lot of weaponry. They move in coordinated groups with dogs and tanks. They have strong control over the waterways, and their oppressive structure is really well documented in notes with dead soldiers. On a nearby island are the Seraphites, or Scars, a tribal group who are smaller in number but much more brutal in their crucifixion of victims. They communicate by whistling and are proficient with bow and arrow. You have three main enemy groups: Infected, Wolves, and Seraphites. None of them are redeemable or lovable, which is really important because remember who we're playing as. Ellie isn't Joel, and if the main character in your game has to kill a lot of enemies, they'd better be bad guys. Does this remind anyone of Uncharted? Sometimes you have to kill a dog, and sometimes if you kill someone, their friends will cry out for them. You spend 3 days in Seattle as Ellie hunting down Abby. Along the way, Jesse shows up having come after you two, and you all search for Tommy, who came down by himself before any of you. The game is easy to consume for the most part. It's gorgeous, there's fun development between Ellie, Dina, and Jesse, and you track down leads. There are flashbacks which punctuate all the chapters. Ellie spends time with Joel in a museum, Tommy teaches Ellie how to snipe. They're all genuinely very well done and add a lot. They break the pacing well and remind you why you're here and what you've lost. Eventually, Ellie sneaks into a hospital where she knows one of the people who ambushed Joel, Nora, is. Ellie finds her, and the tone of the game changes slightly. You chase her into a room full of spores, which Ellie, recall, is immune to. Nora begins to choke and die, and Ellie asks where Abby is. Nora refuses, and Ellie proceeds to torture her. Nora's last spoken words are, "I'm not giving up, my friend." The way the expression changes on Ellie's face is tremendous. She seems to get into her own head and pump herself up and make herself so angry she's capable of torturing Nora. As her face turns, something so small pops up reminding you where you stand. Press square to attack. This isn't a dialogue you're involved in. It's a character study where you pull the trigger. But don't forget what it feels like to inhabit this character. Don't forget what it feels like to inhabit Joel. There's an inherent strength of any story which is cranked up to 11 playing a game. It's difficult to despise a main character that's well written, no matter how evil or flawed they are. Ellie is really lovable. She's talented at the guitar, which you're allowed to play as her. She collects trading cards and loves comic books, which are this game's little secret you find. Do you see what's happening here? Not just Ellie's excited to find a card, both of you are. The audience is sewn together to Ellie and how we idolize and miss Joel. In our fondness for the guitar, it's a very easy and fun little minigame. For our jealousy of Jesse and affection for Dina, and in our excitement to find a card Ellie likes that's tucked away in a spot. How can you hate a character you feel so closely attached to? This is the sleight of hand. This is the important feature of the game. It becomes ludic only when you get excited to learn to play guitar, when you learn to snipe with Tommy, or when you press square to attack. Ellie returns to Dina and Jesse, traumatized. She's shaking and she's out of it, and we get a really strong scene between her and Dina. It's tender and sad, and Ellie telling Dina she doesn't want to lose her is what the game is about. It's the central push-pull. It snaps more clearly into focus later, but for now the question is whether or not it's worth seeking revenge at the risk of losing the one and ones you love. This game is about war in a lot of ways. It finds more talking points as it goes, but for now the most central idea is whether this quest to get back at Abby is worth it. Is killing her worth risking losing Dina, Jesse, Tommy, and the hurt that it brings Ellie in torturing and killing so many? Ellie torturing Nora scratches at something just below the surface. She seems to mirror Joel, who kept her alive and who she looks up to dearly. An interesting note at this point, though, is we've seen somebody else torture an enemy who killed a loved one of theirs. It's Abby. She's still clearly a villain, so we're not expected to forgive her or think very hard about her even, but it's worth noting that in Ellie's pursuit of those who killed and tortured Joel, she's killing her way across the city of Seattle. There's really phenomenal acting and storytelling in the flashback that punctuates the scene, which I won't ruin. As an aside, in this video, I'm really struggling with what to say and include because I want to pace it well. It's already really long, and I don't want to spoil anything, but all the details are so relevant repeatedly. Everything is really clever and deliberate and intertwined, and it all weaves this really great narrative which interacts with itself super well. So Ellie learns that Abby is hiding in an aquarium and travels with Jesse across the city towards the coast. It's ominous, it's moody, it's clearly where Abby is. Once again, every detail here is super crucial. The aquarium is dark, it's damp, and it's brooding. Clearly something has gone down here, or is going down. There are sleeping bags, and clearly there's been a surgery recently. Some dog pops out at you and you have to mash square to get it off you and kill it. Two people are fighting about something through a doorway, and Ellie surprises them and tells them not to move. Abby isn't here, and Ellie tells them both to point at the map individually to where she is, and they better fucking match. This is explicit text. She's trying Joel's move from The Last of Us 1. But listen to her voice. Does she seem like the cold, emotionless killer Joel was? She doesn't have the same reason to kill, and if she does, it's in fighting for Dina, not avenging Joel. That's a good thing. She's our hero, and she's the focal point of this story. She's killing people because it's a game, but they're bad guys. She wouldn't kill anyone innocent. The man grabs for her gun, and she shoots him in the chest. The woman cries out, "Owen," and holds a knife to Ellie's throat. You mash square again and stab her in the throat. Owen lies bleeding out, and Ellie rushes to him and tries to force information out of him, but all he can say is, "She's." You can see the realization on Ellie's face. He wasn't going to say something about Abby. He was going to say something about the woman you just killed. She's what? Ellie rips off her coat and she's pregnant. The connective tissue is explicit. It's not just that she's pregnant and probably innocent. It's that so is Dina. Ellie starts to hyperventilate when Tommy and Jesse burst in. The blood pools on the floor and the music swells. There's a lot of pause and breathing room. There's a lot to think about. We return to Ellie lying facing Dina. This scene is brilliant and really important. The pacing of the game is what's really important to understand here. Typically the structure is as follows: story beat, explore, story beat, flashback, and then return to home base, the theater. All of the story beats happen out of the theater, and after a flashback we return to our safe, isolated home. The same is true here. After the aquarium, everyone resolves to leave Seattle. There's banter. Tommy mentions that he found his wife and the leader of the civilization of Jackson a necklace as a peace offering. Things are hard after Ellie killed those two, but they're okay. She's going to have to be okay not killing Abby. It's imperfect, but it's really the right answer after all she's done and those she still needs to protect. This is the end of her arc. She's resolved to be okay not killing Abby. Suddenly there's commotion outside, and you and Jesse run out to see when Jesse is shot through the face. His last words to you were, "My friend's problems are my problems." Dina never got to tell him that she was pregnant with his child. Tommy's held at gunpoint. It's Abby. Of course it's Abby. Ellie tells her that she knows why she killed Joel. She's the only one they want. She's the immune one. But it's no longer really about that. Abby reminds you what you've done. You killed my friends. We let both of you live and you wasted it. She's right. So are you. This is the absolute climax of the game so far. It's the culmination of two people orbiting one another and killing one another's loved ones. Abby points the gun to Ellie and break. Fade to black, 4 years earlier. The game turns on a dime. The messaging changes. The flashback is now Abby's. She's looking for her father. He's a doctor of some sort. There are 100 things happening in this flashback. Abby picks up a quarter and examines both sides excitedly. When she finds her dad, she offers him the quarter.
Look what I found.
Oh, wow. 1978. Don't have that one in my collection.
You can keep it. If you promise not to pull anything like this again.
You got yourself a deal.
Why don't I believe you?
No reason I could think of.
Do you see what's happening here? I'm trying to be brief with this, but man, this flashback is excellent. Abby's dad asks about a boy who seems to be dating Abby named Owen. Does the name sound familiar? Owen comes to find them and tells them about a girl who's just been brought in, who seems to be immune to infection. Abby's dad is a doctor. He realizes there's no way to remove the specimen without killing the host. A firefly asks him, what if she was Abby? That's the central question of the game. They're mirroring one another is the central premise here. Abby tells her dad that if it was her, she'd want him to do the surgery. I can't help but hear Ellie say the same thing if she was given the choice by Joel. Joel didn't ask her or tell her what he had done because he knew her answer. Joel couldn't lose Ellie, but Ellie's brave and would have given her life in an instant. Most likely, Joel knew that. The pieces began to click. Of course Abby would have it out for Joel. He slaughtered her father, a doctor who was trying to save humanity. In one of our best match cuts in the game, her sobbing, grieving face lit by the blinking red emergency light flips to 4 years later, stoic and cold, a bit older, torturing Joel. Ellie is pleading for Joel's life. We're in the same room, in the same moment in time as we've been before, but pay close attention to the perspective. It's not the same scene. We aren't watching Ellie. We're watching Abby. The distinction is just where the camera is, but who are you thinking about as you watch Abby think and grit her teeth? Some of the group decide they want to kill Ellie, but Owen, who's really the best character in this game, says if they kill him, they're no better than Joel. We didn't hear this conversation the first time we played it because there's ringing in Ellie's ears. This is characterization. It's brilliant. And again, I cannot characterize the really brilliant way this text enters after. We return to Seattle, but day one. The feeling of horrible dread that came over me as that text faded in is worthy of award. We wake up with Abby. Let's pause to review the implications because I really almost stopped playing here for a little bit. We're about 12 hours in. This game has been very difficult, and as the climax arrives, we're sent back to replay things as Abby, as who used to seem like the villain. Can you imagine staring over the brink of that? Not only having to replay so much as a villain and having to wait to learn about the standoff, but having to get to know Abby, who is looking less and less like a villain with each passing second. It's brutal and it's really magnificent. This brings us to the third reason of 3 that people hate this game. It's hard. Not only do they kill Joel, which is deeply difficult and unpopular, but you aren't allowed to treat it like an easy revenge fantasy. You can't play this like you played The Last of Us 1, killing bad guys and keeping it moving. You can turn your head away, but you're going to have to look at what Joel did to Abby's dad, what Abby did to Joel, and what Ellie did to Abby's friends. It has precisely the reconciliation The Last of Us 1 needed in its conclusion, and it forces you to pause and think about and hurt with your avatars. A lot of user reviews on Metacritic complain about not being able to skip Abby's campaign, but why would you? She's so tremendously well written and has a really clear and understandable set of motives and fears. Her exterior is gruff. She's less attractive than Abby, which I have to mention because think about how we're conditioned to see protagonists and antagonists. Her hair is tied back tightly, she has a square jaw, really huge arms. She's so easy to hate until you play her. So you wake up as her in the WLF page, which is, it's gorgeous. It's in the middle of a stadium, and man, I'm trying really hard not to make this video an hour long because I could talk really extensively about Isaac, Manny, and the entire organization, but Abby's treatment is true as well of the wolves in Microcosm. The wolves are a really terrifying militant group, but in their base, they exercise and eat. There's a community. Abby gave Manny their room last night because he had a girl over. It's a lot harder to hate both of them when you control Abby. She's shredded and she's unlovable as an antagonist, but when you play her, you realize she's afraid of heights. If she looks down any large gap, if you look down any large gap, the game physically distorts and swells your vision. Do you see what's happening here? I'm going to spend way less time with Abby's campaign, but I'm really trying to suggest the idea of ludonarrative synergy in the game before I say it explicitly. There's genuinely so much to talk about, and I haven't even talked about Abby's campaign, which has this fucking great love triangle, a really excellent trans character, and a tangent. It's nice to have representation. Lev is really well written, and recall that this game got review bombed by gamers who were really upset about, huge air quotes, SJW stuff. It's not jock culture that's homophobic and misogynistic, it's male culture. The trappings change from football to League of Legends, but that's just window dressing. I had to mention that. Is it clear yet why this game employs ludonarrative so perfectly? It's the mirrored story structure that you have to play. This game narratively is about how people on the other side of war are easier to kill on a battlefield when they're shooting at you. They're even easier to kill if they've killed a loved one of yours, but don't they have dead loved ones? If you pause for one moment, it's obvious that there's no person in a war without family, without interests, without ideas and quirks and stories to tell, things they like to collect, and personal anxieties. The slight is that this message isn't immediately obvious. It's only after you've seen Red as Ellie and resolved to kill Abby. After you kill her friends, and after you kill countless others, that you're allowed to know who they were to Abby. The dog you killed as Ellie is named Alice. You can throw the ball with her as Abby. The aquarium isn't a place where you're hoping to kill Abby, it's Owen's favorite place in the world that he decorated and hides in because it's beautiful and it's just his. The Last of Us 2 is perfect because it doesn't just tell you what it's about in cutscenes and some dialogue, it makes you feel it, especially if you don't want to. Abby is a fucking great character. She's strong, she's brave, she's selfless, and she's really, really lovable. How can you hate a character like that, especially when you control? Abby's story deals a lot with her relationship, not with Ellie. Remember, she doesn't know Ellie's chasing after her, but with the tribal group, the Seraphites. Remember, Abby's a wolf and she hates them and has really been at war for them for many years. Her story is about meeting a few Seraphites, Lev and Yara, and understanding why they think the way they do. It's really nothing extraordinary on paper, but the way it's told ludically is really strong. At one point, Abby boosts one of the two Seraphites she meets over a window and is immediately overwhelmed by infected as they escape. Of course they would desert you, they're scars, and you shouldn't have trusted them. You're not watching Abby struggle not to die, you're struggling not to die in a gameplay section. This distinction is so crucial. It's a really natural and strong way for you to inhabit Abby and feel how she feels without a monologue. And in a few minutes after struggling alone when Lev and Yara bust a car windshield open trying to save you, well, they earn your trust without having to watch Abby talk or buy in. How do you make an audience relate to their avatar? Don't have them watch the avatar struggled in a deep well. Kick them in with the avatar. Make them and the avatar excited to find a Hawaii coin. Don't listen to Abby tell someone she's afraid of heights. Have any time the player points the camera down, the physical land under Abby distorts. Have a clicker pop out at you while you're at a workbench, which, in the language of games, is a safe menu screen for an upgrade. Ellie isn't ever safe in this world. Why should the audience be? And amidst some of the bigger questions about war and violence, there are these small personal stories. Ellie's dynamic with Dina is sincerely beautiful. Abby's relationship with Owen, despite his romantic partnership with Mel, is gripping. It's incredibly gut-wrenching and beautiful. Lev's story and really difficult time telling his mom and telling his sister that he's always known he's a boy is really beautiful and difficult. I think by now the ludonarrative is probably clear. The mechanics of this game, the way it plays, and more specifically, but perhaps a little more difficult than how it plays, is the fact that you play it all. Having half of your game devoted to controlling an antagonist isn't exactly a mechanic. It's not like in BioShock where you have a moment at the end of the gameplay sections where you make a choice. It's different, and yet it keeps staring right at you, knowingly. By not putting the controller down, by not giving up and review bombing the game, you're engaging in conversation. The ludus, the gameplay here, is that Abby fights slightly differently. Ellie is evasive and fights with her knife, slashing shallowly and repeatedly trying to bleed her opponent out. Abby boxes with clickers with her bare fists. She chokes people out with her massive arms. That just seems like facts about how she plays, but think really carefully about how that informs the narrative. A narrative about how menacing and evil she seems when the camera is following Ellie and hears ringing after she's traumatized, but which sheds Owen in a really positive and good-natured light if you're seeing things as Abby saw them. Who the camera follows, the way the sound design informs how this scene plays, even in the same room, at the same moment in time, tells two different stories depending on who you've gotten to know. That's what The Last of Us 2 is about. So this is where the video has to end. Probably if you're still watching this, it's because you're a loved one of mine and you care about me enough to watch all of this, so I can't drag it out another 30 minutes. If this video has sparked something in you, great, go play Last of Us. I've probably only scratched the surface of its really smart design, and even though I spoiled a lot of it, I haven't touched the ending or any of the really beautiful small ideas you hear in conversation and you feel, most importantly. That's what this game is about. That's why it has the unique ability to be untouchable by spoilers. You might know the plot points, but that's not the game. The game is about how you feel as you pick up cards and coins and look down from high up. If you wrote off this game because the main character is gay, or even because Joel dies, give it another try. You're allowed to feel bad playing it. Actually, you're supposed to. That's the state of intended play. Not because you see a gay or trans character, though. That's just you being gross. But if you're one of the people whose Metacritic reviews I read that complained about not being able to skip Abby's playthrough, give it another try. This game is for you in a way I can't even characterize. Feel bad. Be Abby. That's the unique ability you have in games. You get to be someone, not just watch them. It's why when Abby gets her throat torn out from clickers for the 4th time in this one hard room, you don't say, "Oh, Abby got hurt again." You say, "I died." So once again, go play this game. Feel something. Go fall in love and hate someone and lose a loved one, and think about why you feel any of those things looking at a TV. Thank you so much for watching this video. I love you.